Hey Psycho! Did you hear the news? Tomonobu Itagaki, the legendary game designer behind Dead or Alive and the revival of Ninja Gaiden, has passed away. So let's pay tribute to his life by reviewing his most ambitious, or at least most anticipated game, Devil's Third. Let me be frank. I didn't play Devil's Third, nor do I really play any game for its story. I'm very much in the camp that a game is about the gameplay first and story second, and a distant second at that. I do have a soft spot for point-and-click adventure games like Monkey Island, where the story really integrates into the puzzles. But for action games such as this, I put story on the back burner. That being said, I do want to give thorough reviews, so whilst I normally skip cutscenes, when I play video games for my reviews, I let them play out. And surprisingly enough, Devil's Third has quite a few cutscenes. I feel Itagaki-san was following in the footsteps of Hideo Kojima and Metal Gear Solid by trying to tell an overly complicated and convoluted story. I won't go into every detail because I honestly don't remember them, but the gist is this. An ex-Soviet terrorist group named the School of Democracy, or SOD for short, triggers the explosion of a communications satellite, which in turn causes a chain reaction that destroys all the world's satellites. With the world in turmoil and the SOD planning an even greater attack, the US military is forced to recruit the only man who knows how they operate, an ex-SOD member kept deep underground underneath Guantanamo Bay named Ivan. This drum-playing tattooed badass is the world's only hope, but is he up for the task? You bet he is. Oh yeah. Devil's Third has an interesting blend of third-person and first-person gameplay. When traversing the world or in melee combat, the camera stays positioned above the shoulder in third person. But once you pick up a gun and aim, the camera zooms into a first-person view so you can target your enemies with precision. The switch between perspectives is smooth and mostly works really well. While I really like the concept of blending action genres, I feel the execution, particularly with melee combat, could have used more polish and been made more robust. In melee combat, your offensive moveset is limited to a quick attack and a heavy attack, and that's basically it. There are no real combos to learn, no moves to get unlocked later in the game, it's just those two attacks and that's it. Defensively, you can perform a dodge, which is pretty good for evading attacks, but if you don't want to roll around everywhere, you can also just guard, as long as you're not being shot at, of course. However, there's no parry or counter mechanic, which is funny considering Dead or Alive, Itagaki-san's 3D fighting game series, was well known for its counterattack system. You'd think he'd bring that gameplay to Devil's Third. That being said, the simple melee combat system is still fun to play, but it can also get rather repetitive, especially with large groups of enemies, where you'll likely see the same kill move over and over. However, it does have one interesting mechanic, and that's the Enbaku gauge. Whenever you kill or attack an enemy with melee combat, it doesn't work for gunplay, you gain Enbaku energy. And once your energy gauge is full, you can unleash your Enbaku power, which makes you stronger, faster, and more durable for a short amount of time. It can be pretty fun to unleash the power while surrounded by enemies and then cutting them down with ruthless efficiency. Despite wielding an awesome katana that easily cuts through enemies like butter, because most baddies have guns, the majority of combat in Devil's Third is first-person shooting. Here the gunplay does feel more robust. You can duck behind obstacles for cover, or peek around corners to shoot and then quickly hide. It's implemented pretty well, with my only complaint control-wise being that it can be hard to aim. However, I'm more of a mouse and keyboard gamer for first-person shooters, and I was playing Devil's Third on the Wii U using the Pro Controller. So my aiming wasn't the greatest, but that's more of a me thing than the game. I know some people are really good with thumbstick aiming, I'm just not one of them. The selection of guns is mostly what you'd expect. A bunch of semi-automatic rifles for medium to long-range combat, some shotguns for up close, and sniper rifles and rocket launchers for extra long distance. Every so often you're given control of a Gatling gun or some other super heavy machinery that deals massive damage. It's nice all its bases are covered with close-up and long-range weapons, but it's mostly what I'd expect from this style of military action game. No gun was really exciting or surprising to use. The majority of combat in Devil's Third is against your standard enemy soldier. Occasionally they'll charge you with swords or knives in hand, but usually they just stay back and shoot. But there is some variety in the enemies you'll face as you progress through the game. There are heavily armored behemoths that can take on and deal lots of damage. There are predator-style cloaked soldiers that hide in plain sight trying to blast you away. At one point in the game, you'll even fight off mindless monsters that reminded me of the Flood stage in Halo, which isn't exactly a good thing. Along with all these regular enemies and soldiers, Devil's Third also has a good amount of boss fights. The boss fights are normally against other SOD members, ones that have a personal history with our protagonist Ivan, but some are just fights against huge monsters. Unfortunately, the boss fights are not that great. Some are ridiculously easy while others seem a bit over the top in difficulty, but overall I think their biggest weakness is these fights rely heavily on the melee combat system, which as I mentioned before, isn't very robust. Given Itagaki-san's experience with 3D fighters, I feel Devil's Third could have introduced another genre of gameplay and turned the boss fights into legit Dead or Alive style matches, leveraging combos and parries to offer a whole new gameplay experience. As it is right now, most of the boss encounters entail rolling around and dodging over and over, until you see an opening, then striking once or twice, and then rolling some more. That pattern gets repetitive real fast, and the boss fights ended up not being the highlights I hoped they'd be. Devil's Third was a Wii U exclusive when it first released. In its long development cycle, I don't think it was intended to be a Wii U game from the get-go, but at some point during its creation, Nintendo came along and offered up the Wii U as Devil's Third debut console. Therefore, graphically, I wasn't expecting much, but even with that said, Devil's Third doesn't look too great. I think it's pretty clear that Itagaki-san's Valhalla Game Studios didn't have the budget or resources to make Devil's Third a next-gen game. Just like the gameplay, I feel the visuals in Devil's Third could have used more polish. The environment and character designs of the enemies serve their purpose, but for the most part aren't very visually interesting. The problem is they're not high-res enough to be impressive from a realism standpoint, nor are they stylistic enough to be visually interesting without all the graphical horsepower. The most interesting designs and visuals are in Ivan and his SOD crew, but I think the regular baddies and the world could have used their same stylistic flair. Now, if I had played the game when it came out back in 2015, I feel I would have been even more critical of the graphics. I would have compared it to other games of the time like The Witcher 3, and it would have paled in comparison. But since it's 10 years old, I almost see it as a relic of the past, like a charming PS3 game. So even though it was not a great looking game during its time, I now see it as a fun looking old school action game. When I first heard way back when that Tomonobu Itagaki had left Tecmo to start Valhalla Game Studios with a bunch of Team Ninja devs, I was excited. Being a big fan of Dead or Alive and his Ninja Gaiden, I genuinely looked forward to his next creation. However, the development of Devil's Third must not have gone smoothly, as Valhalla Game Studios was founded in 2008, but Devil's Third, their first game, wasn't released until 2015. That's 7 years later. It was first teased in 2010, but then Itagaki-san and team went mostly radio silent for another 4 years until they re-teased Devil's Third in 2014. This time with Ivan as the protagonist and a more fleshed out world. The problem was, in 2010, the game looked exciting and of its generation, but after 4 years, the visuals already appeared dated. All my excitement for the game left me. It felt like another Daikatana situation, all hype and no substance. So, I never gave it a chance. But now it's 10 years later and I found a copy for way too much money and I gave it a shot. And you know what? I liked it. It's actually pretty fun. The mixture of third-person and first-person gameplay worked pretty well. It's fun to shoot up baddies and then run in and slice them down, but it lacks polish. Visually, the environments are mostly bland, the regular enemies are largely generic looking and repetitive, and the action, while interesting in concept, can sometimes feel shallow. It feels like a prototype that was built to generate buzz and secure funding for a larger, more expansive gameplay experience. But it seems they couldn't find the money, so they turned their prototype into a full game as best they could. With all that said, I'm giving Devil's Third a 3 out of 5. It's pretty fun, but its concept has more potential than its actual gameplay achieved. It needed way more polish and iteration to fine-tune the gameplay and expand its features, and it probably should have leaned more towards stylized graphics instead of realism. Devil's Third is a great idea that, had it had the resources it needed, could have been the evolution of the genre it was meant to be. My journey with Devil's Third is an interesting one. First, I was excited for it, but then disappointed when it finally released and never gave it a chance. However, recently, as I've been working on this channel trying to find different games to review, Devil's Third just popped into my mind and I became curious to own and play it. At first I was only passively looking for it, but when I read that Tomonobu Itagaki had passed away, I set my mind to get a copy and give it a full review. Itagaki-san will have a lasting legacy in gaming with his creation of Dead or Alive and his revival of Ninja Gaiden, but I was curious if his final creation had any of the magic of those more impactful games, and I think it does. Devil's Third is a unique gameplay experience, and had it had the proper resources, I do believe it could have been great. I don't think Tomonobu Itagaki lost his mojo when he created Devil's Third. My assumption is he just didn't have the funds in Valhalla Game Studios as he did in Tecmo. Both Dead or Alive and Ninja Gaiden are known for tight controls and expertly polished combat systems and controls he designed. I think if he had the money and team he required, he could have made Devil's Third's combat on par with Ninja Gaiden, and that would have been something spectacular. But as it is now, it's his final game, which is sort of a shame. I always held out hope that he'd get another chance to make something awesome. But that's life. Most of us won't ever be able to reach our potential even once, but he got to do it twice, and even had the opportunity to try for a third. And that's pretty great. And at least for this fan, I will remember Tomonobu Itagaki not only for Dead or Alive and Ninja Gaiden, but also for the good times and fun I had with Devil's Third.